Hello everyone, wishing you a wonderful day. Today we're diving into a story where a powerful CEO walks away from everything, his family, his empire, for love and an unborn child. But just as they start over, something begins to go terribly wrong. If you enjoy this kind of emotional, slow burn story, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next episodes. The decision didn't come with a loud argument. It didn't come with a dramatic announcement. And it certainly didn't come easily. It came in silence. The kind of silence that builds after too many words have already been said, too many lines have already been crossed, and nothing left can be undone. That night, the house felt colder than ever. Not just quiet, but divided. On one side, expectation, legacy, control. On the other, love, uncertainty, and a fragile life waiting to be born. Tieu Lac sat on the edge of the bed, her hands resting on her belly, her breathing slow but uneven. The baby had been restless again, kicking more often, harder, as if reacting to everything happening around her. She closed her eyes briefly. "I'm here," she whispered. But even she could feel it. Something wasn't right, not physically, not yet, but emotionally, and that mattered more than she wanted to admit. The door opened softly. The CEO stepped in. He didn't turn on the light, didn't speak immediately. He just stood there for a moment, as if trying to find the right words in a room that no longer belonged to either of them. Then he walked closer, slow, careful. Tieu Lac. She looked up. His voice was different, not tense, not defensive, but resolved. And that scared her more than anything else. "What happened?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he sat down beside her, close, but not too close. "I talked to her." Tieu Lac's fingers tightened slightly. "And?" A long pause. "She won't change." The words were simple, but final. Tieu Lac lowered her eyes. She had expected that. Somewhere deep inside, she already knew. "And you?" she asked. This time, he didn't hesitate. "I will." Silence, the kind that shifts everything. Tieu Lac slowly looked back at him. There was no anger in his face, no frustration, just clarity. "I can't keep asking you to stay in a place that keeps hurting you." His voice softened. "And I won't let our child grow up where they're not wanted." Her breath caught, because those words, they weren't just comforting. They were a decision. "You're leaving," she whispered. He nodded. Yes. A single word, but it carried weight. Everything. My family, the company, all of it. Tieu Lac's eyes widened slightly. "No." She shook her head instinctively. "You don't have to do that." But he did, and they both knew it. "I'm not doing it because I have to." He turned to her fully now. "I'm doing it because I choose to." A pause. "For you." Another pause. "For our child." Tieu Lac felt something inside her chest tighten. Not pain, not fear, something deeper. Because she had once asked herself, would he ever choose her? Now, he had. And somehow, that made everything feel even heavier. They left before sunrise. No announcement, no goodbye, no second chances. Just two people walking away from a world that no longer felt like home. The car moved quietly through the empty road, the city fading behind them, replaced slowly by open fields, narrow paths, and the familiar scent of earth and wind. Tieu Lac leaned her head slightly against the window, watching everything pass by. This road, she had taken it once before, but this time, she wasn't running. She was choosing. Beside her, the CEO drove in silence, his hands steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed ahead, but inside, nothing was calm. He had built everything, his position, his power, his future. And now, he had walked away from it, not because he failed, but because he chose something else, something uncertain, something fragile, something real. He glanced at Tieu Lac briefly. Her hand rested on her belly again, protective, gentle, and suddenly, everything made sense. The village welcomed them quietly. No questions, no judgment, just the same simple life Tieu Lac had once known. A small house, a wooden fence, the sound of chickens in the distance, and air that didn't feel heavy. For the first time in a long while, Tieu Lac breathed deeply. "Does it feel strange?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "A little." A pause. "But peaceful." He nodded. That was enough. Days passed slowly, but differently. No tension, no silent judgment, no cold stares. Just life. Simple routines returned. Morning tea, cooking together, cleaning the small house, and sometimes just sitting side by side, saying nothing. But this time, the silence wasn't heavy, it was safe. Tieu Lac's body grew heavier with each passing day, her movements slower, her breathing deeper, and the baby, more active than ever. Sometimes it would kick so suddenly that she would stop mid-step, her hand instinctively pressing against her belly. He noticed everything. "You should rest more," he said one afternoon. "I am resting." He frowned slightly. "That's not resting." She smiled faintly. "You worry too much." A pause, then she added softly, "I'm okay." But he wasn't convinced, because something still felt off. Not obvious, not alarming, but subtle, like a quiet warning beneath everything else. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned a soft shade of orange, Tieu Lac was sitting outside when she suddenly froze. Her hand pressed against her belly, harder this time. Her breathing changed. "Hey," he noticed immediately. "What's wrong?" She didn't answer right away. Her face tightened slightly. "The baby." A pause. "It feels different." He moved closer instantly. "What do you mean?" She shook her head slowly. "I don't know." Her voice was uncertain. "But it's not like before." A silence fell between them, the peaceful air suddenly not so peaceful anymore. He helped her stand. "Let's go inside." But as she took a step, she winced. A sharp, sudden pain, not overwhelming, but enough to make both of them freeze. "Tieu Lac." "I'm fine," she said it quickly. Too quickly, but her hand didn't leave her belly. And her face didn't look fine at all. That night, neither of them slept. The quiet village house, once comforting, now felt too still, too fragile. Tieu Lac lay on the bed, her breathing uneven, her hand resting over the place where life moved inside her. He sat beside her, watching, waiting, every small movement, every change, every breath. "Should we go to the hospital?" he asked. She hesitated, just for a moment. "I don't know." Her voice was softer now, not afraid, but uncertain. Because everything had happened so fast, they had just left, just started over. And now, something was already shifting again. He reached for her hand gently. "We won't take any risks." She looked at him, and for the first time since they left the city, fear returned. Not fear of people, not fear of judgment, but fear of losing something they had fought so hard to protect. Her fingers tightened around his, and in that quiet moment, they both understood. Leaving was only the beginning, because life was about to test them in a way neither of them expected. After choosing love over everything, the CEO leaves his family and career behind to start a new life with Tieu Lac in a quiet countryside village. Their days become simple and peaceful, far from judgment and pressure. As Tieu Lac's pregnancy progresses, they begin to feel a sense of hope and stability. However, as the baby grows closer to birth, subtle signs of discomfort begin to appear. What once felt like peace slowly turns into concern when Tieu Lac experiences unusual pain and changes in the baby's movements. The CEO becomes increasingly worried. realizing that leaving everything behind may have brought new risks they didn't anticipate. Now, standing between love and uncertainty, they must face a critical moment that could change everything for their future and the life they've been trying so hard to protect.